This is my true story. My son thought disrespect was power. One evening at dinner, in front of his wife and children, he leaned across the table and spit on my face. The room went silent, then someone laughed. He called me old, weak, and worthless. I sat there frozen, not from fear, but from something colder. That was the night I stopped being his father and became a man with a plan. He thought that spit would end my pride. He didn't know I still owned everything he stood on. You won't believe what I did next. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And please subscribe so more people hear my story. I gave him everything a father could give. From the day he was born, I worked shifts that broke my back and hands. My palms cracked from cold winters on construction sites, my knees ached from climbing ladders in the rain, and my lungs filled with dust and cement. But every bruise felt worth it when I came home and saw him running toward me with his little arms wide. I remember his small voice calling me Dad, like it was the greatest word in the world. Back then, I thought that love was permanent, that if I kept giving, he would keep remembering. When his mother died, he was still young. I did everything alone, cooked, cleaned, washed, saved. I didn't buy new clothes for years so he could wear good shoes to school. I skipped meals so he wouldn't know hunger. My wallet was never full, but my heart was, full of pride every time he passed an exam, every time he smiled. I carried the world on my shoulders and told myself it was light because it was for my son. When he grew up, I helped him buy his first car. I co-signed every loan, paid the hidden costs, covered the insurance, and even helped him make his first mortgage payment. I told him to keep his name clean, to respect money, to stay humble. He nodded, said yes, but his eyes were already elsewhere, chasing something bigger, something shinier. Over the years, I noticed the changes. He stopped asking how I was, stopped calling unless he needed something. At first, I told myself he was just busy. Work, marriage, stress. I made every excuse a father could make for a son he refused to see clearly. But slowly, I began to realize something terrible. He had learned how to take without feeling. He and his wife would come over for dinner every Sunday. She'd look around the house, whispering small comments about the furniture, the curtains, the old smell of the place. I pretended not to hear. My son would brag about his new gadgets, his new clothes, his bonuses, things I had indirectly helped him achieve. I smiled, even when it hurt. Because that's what fathers do. We smile through betrayal long before it's even called that. But time has a cruel way of showing the truth. Every favor I did became expected. Every bill I paid became invisible. They stopped saying thank you. They stopped treating me like the man who built their world. I became a background, the man who existed only to provide. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself patience was love. I told myself that maybe one day when he had his own child, he'd understand. But understanding never came. Entitlement did. He started talking to me with less kindness, more arrogance. He'd make jokes about my old clothes, my slow walk, my tired eyes. His wife would laugh. I would pretend not to notice. When I gave him the house, my own home, I thought I was giving him a foundation, a chance to start strong. But he treated it like a trophy. He invited guests, threw parties, and acted as if he had built it with his own hands. When I stayed there, I could feel that I was no longer welcome, like I was just a reminder of a past he wanted to forget. And yet, even then, I forgave him. Because I told myself, he's my son. That's what I always said when people told me he didn't deserve it. He's my son. When the neighbors whispered that he was arrogant and selfish, I defended him. He's young, I'd say. When his wife rolled her eyes as I walked into a room, I'd say, maybe she's tired. I made excuses like a fool, hoping kindness could cure cruelty. Looking back now, I realize the truth. I didn't raise a man. I raised someone who thought compassion was weakness. I raised someone who confused humility for failure. And the night he spat on my face was not the first time he disrespected me. It was simply the last time I allowed it. All those years I gave him everything, my strength, my savings, my soul. But that night, when the spit touched my skin and the laughter filled the room, I realized I had given him one thing too many: my forgiveness. That was the moment it ended. The years I gave him became the years I would reclaim. And for the first time in my life, I decided to stop being his father and start being something far colder. It happened on a Sunday night, the kind of evening that was supposed to mean family, warmth, and peace. The table was full. His wife had invited her friends, her parents, even a few of his co-workers. They laughed loudly, clinking glasses and talking about vacations, cars, and promotions. I sat quietly at the end of the table, in my old sweater, the one with a small tear near the sleeve. It was comfortable, familiar, the kind of thing that carried memories. But in that house, comfort had become a crime. Dinner began like any other: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, laughter that felt too polished to be real. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady, but my heart heavy. My son sat across from me, his wife at his side, whispering things into his ear between fake smiles. I could feel her judgment, the way her eyes scanned me, like I was a stranger who didn't belong. Then it started. A joke, small at first. My son looked at me and said, "Dad, maybe you should stop coming dressed like that. You make the place look cheap." The table laughed, even his wife giggled, covering her mouth as if that made it better. I smiled weakly, pretending I didn't hear. I reached for my plate, hoping the moment would pass. But it didn't. The jokes kept coming. "Old men like you should retire from everything, even eating," his friend said, and they all laughed again. My son didn't stop them. He joined in. Each laugh was like a nail driven into my chest. My fork trembled. I kept my eyes on the plate. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd get bored and move on. Instead, he leaned closer. "You know what, Dad?" he said, voice dripping with arrogance. "You sit there like you still matter. But you don't. You're done. I don't owe you anything." The words cut deep, but before I could respond, he spat. It was sudden, warm, sharp. The sound echoed in the quiet that followed. A drop hit my cheek and slid down to my collar. For a moment, I couldn't move. The table froze. His wife gasped softly, but not in horror, in amusement. And then came the laughter. The same laughter that had mocked my clothes, my work, my age. Now it mocked my dignity. I sat there, staring at my plate. My heart was a storm, but my face stayed calm. I reached for my napkin, wiped my face gently, and looked at him. I didn't speak. I didn't curse. I didn't even blink hard. Because in that silence, something inside me shifted forever. It wasn't just the spit. It was everything it represented. It was every night I came home with broken hands to buy him a toy. Every time I skipped food so he could eat more. Every time I defended him when the neighbors said he was disrespectful. Every ounce of love that I poured into a boy who had grown into a monster. I realized in that instant that I wasn't a father anymore. I was a servant who had outlived his use. A symbol of humility they wanted to erase from their shiny new lives. And if I had spoken then, it would have meant begging for respect I should never have had to ask for. So, I stayed quiet. I stood up slowly, pushed my chair back, and walked to the kitchen. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was sharp. I could still hear them laughing behind me, his wife whispering, "He's so dramatic." The same people who had eaten food I bought, lived in a house I paid for, and wore clothes my savings helped buy. Now laughing at me as though I was entertainment. I stood by the sink, staring at my reflection in the window. The old man, looking back, wasn't weak. He was waiting. The humiliation didn't break me. It hardened me. It forged something new, something colder than anger. Because anger burns fast. But humiliation? It freezes, and when it melts, it reshapes everything around it. When I turned around, I saw them still talking, unaware of what they had just done. They thought the old man they mocked would sit quietly forever. They thought I'd return the next Sunday, pretending everything was fine. They thought wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my small room, lights off, replaying the moment in my mind. Not the spit, not the laughter, but the sound of my own silence. Because I realized silence can be louder than revenge. By morning, I knew exactly what I would do. That dinner didn't just break me. It built the man who would walk into a lawyer's office the next day. Calm, deliberate, and ready to erase every trace of mercy he'd ever shown. When I reached the kitchen that night, the laughter from the dining room still echoed through the walls. It was muffled by distance, but sharp enough to pierce through every inch of my pride. I stood by the counter, hands trembling slightly, not from age or weakness, but from something colder. Humiliation. Pure, unfiltered humiliation. I could still feel the warmth of the spit on my cheek. I wiped it again, though it was already gone, as if trying to erase the moment from my skin. But moments like that don't wash away. They stay, they carve, they rot from the inside out. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken, butter, and wine, the same dinner I had paid for. I had bought every ingredient, as I always did, thinking that providing for them was love, thinking that giving was the same as being appreciated. I stood there, looking at the half-filled plates, the glasses they'd touched, the laughter they'd shared, and it hit me. I had built this comfort. Every chair, every spoon, every wall had my fingerprints on it, and still, they sat out there, laughing like I was a burden, like I didn't belong. I looked around the kitchen, at the photographs on the fridge, birthdays, vacations, graduations. In all of them, I was there, in the corner, smiling quietly. Always the background. Always the man behind their success, behind their smiles, behind their comfort. I thought love was service. I thought fatherhood was sacrifice. But standing there, in the glow of the kitchen light, I finally understood. To them, I wasn't a father anymore. I was furniture. Useful until I wasn't needed. I heard my son's voice drift in from the dining room, loud and drunk with arrogance. "He should be grateful we even let him stay here," he said, his words slurred with laughter. The others agreed. Even his wife chimed in, saying, "He's just too old to understand success." Success. That word burned. I built his success. Brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I gave him the life he flaunted, the very table he disrespected me on. And yet, here I was, standing in my own kitchen like an unwanted guest. My hands gripped the counter. My reflection glared back at me in the steel of the kettle, tired, gray, quiet. But there was something new there too, a kind of stillness, the kind that comes before a storm, the kind that replaces pain with precision. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just breathed, slow and steady, and started counting. Not memories, not regrets, but assets, papers, titles, signatures, the things that still had my name, not his. It was a strange comfort, realizing how much of the world still technically belonged to me. He might have taken my dignity that night, but he hadn't taken the foundation beneath his own feet. I still owned the house. I still held the papers. I still had the power, buried under years of quiet compliance, but never gone. The laughter finally stopped. Chairs scraped. Footsteps moved upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to every sound until the house went silent again. When I finally walked back to the dining room, it was a battlefield of empty glasses, half-eaten food, and spilled wine. The light flickered above the table, throwing shadows over the mess. My plate was still there, untouched, cold. I sat down and stared at it for a long time. The shame had turned to something else now, something sharper. I wasn't broken. I was awake. For the first time in years, I saw everything clearly. The son I'd raised with patience and love was gone, replaced by a man who thought cruelty was power. The wife beside him, complicit, smug, had turned my home into a place of mockery. I cleaned the table slowly, piece by piece, each plate stacked neatly, each glass washed with care. My movements were quiet, methodical. The same discipline I'd used to raise him, now repurposed for something far colder. When I finished, I turned off the lights, letting the house sink into darkness. In that darkness, I made my decision. They thought I would come back to the table the next morning, pretending nothing had happened. They thought the old man would forget, because that's what old men do. Forget. But I didn't forget. I memorized every laugh, every smirk, every word. And by the time they woke up the next day, I had already decided what I would take. Everything. Not out of spite, but out of justice. They wanted to treat me like I was nothing, so I would show them what life looks like when I truly become nothing to them. That night in the kitchen wasn't humiliation. It was transformation. It was the quiet birth of revenge that required no yelling, no violence, only paperwork and patience. I turned off the last light, looked one final time at the empty table, and whispered to myself, "You won't be laughing tomorrow." When morning came, the house smelled of stale wine and arrogance. The laughter from last night was gone, replaced by the slow creak of footsteps and the clatter of dishes. I sat quietly by the window, my coffee untouched, watching the fog lift from the yard. My son moved around upstairs like a king waking in his castle, not realizing the kingdom wasn't his. He thought I was just sitting there, old, defeated, humiliated. But in truth, I wasn't sitting. I was calculating. I went to my small study, the one no one ever entered anymore. It smelled like dust and time, like all the years I spent saving, signing, and securing. The old wooden drawers still held everything that truly mattered, not memories, but proof. Proof that I had never been foolish with my life. Proof that beneath my silence, there was structure. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the shoebox I had hidden long ago. Inside were papers wrapped in rubber bands, property deeds, mortgage titles, account statements, insurance bonds, and the last will I had drafted but never finalized. My son's name appeared on a few, but not the important ones. Those still bore mine. Each page was a reminder of every year I worked with cracked hands and sore knees. Every line of ink was written with sacrifice. When I bought that house, I was younger, stronger, and proud to call it home. I never imagined that one day the same roof I built would echo with my humiliation. As I went through each document, I realized how blind love makes you. You give everything, thinking it's protection, but all it does is build the walls that trap you. My eyes lingered on the house deed. My name, bold, permanent, at the top. His, temporary, conditional, below. I had kept ownership quietly, never transferring full control. It wasn't distrust back then, it was caution. But now, it was salvation. That paper was my weapon, my justice, my exit. I smiled faintly for the first time in years, not out of joy, but clarity. I took out the small key to the safe, hidden inside a hollow part of the bookshelf. The safe clicked open like a quiet heartbeat. Inside were the things no one knew existed. Old savings certificates, a separate account booklet, and a letter from the bank confirming my secondary power over every joint account. My son thought the accounts were his playground, that my name was there out of habit. But habits have consequences, and I was about to turn that oversight into a lesson. I spread everything on the desk in neat order. Deed, bank details, shares, car titles, insurance. My old wedding ring even sat there, heavy with irony. These weren't just things. They were years, decades, the pieces of a life built from nothing but willpower. And as I looked at them, I realized that everything he had, his house, his comfort, his so-called power, existed because of me. Every inch of that home was soaked in my labor. I picked up my pen and began writing. Not a letter, not an apology, just a list, a plan. I wrote names, the lawyer, the real estate agent, the bank manager, the only people I would speak to in the coming days. No shouting, no threats, no scenes. I didn't need noise. The law makes no sound when it breaks someone. It just moves, slowly and decisively, like a glacier grinding through stone. The house was mine. The land beneath it was mine. The accounts were mine to freeze, the payments mine to redirect. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. The kind of calm a man feels when he's been wounded for too long and finally stops bleeding. I wasn't after revenge. I was after peace. My hand brushed against a photo frame on the corner of the desk. My son as a child, smiling, his arms around my neck. For a moment, something soft twisted in my chest. That small boy had trusted me once. He had looked up at me with love, not hate. Somewhere between that photograph and last night, he'd turned into someone else. And maybe I had too. Love had blinded me once, not anymore. I put the photo face down, then I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a clean page. Count what matters. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the property. It was dignity, the one thing they could never steal unless I let them. I had given them comfort, time, and respect. But not this. Not anymore. The pen stopped. My plan was ready. I knew what needed to be done, who needed to be called, and when it had to happen. Every step would be quiet, deliberate, legal. I didn't want to destroy him with anger. I wanted him to destroy himself by realizing how fragile his comfort had been, how much of it had been mine all along. When I closed the notebook, I felt lighter. The humiliation of last night no longer burned. It had turned to steel. My son's laughter had taught me the last lesson of my life. Silence isn't weakness, it's warning. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still, the air thick with the kind of silence that comes after a storm. I didn't make breakfast like I usually did. I didn't wait for anyone to wake. I just dressed in my old coat, the same one they used to laugh at, and left quietly. My shoes echoed down the cold path as I walked toward the bus stop, holding a folder close to my chest. Inside, it was everything: my proof, my ownership, my exit. When I reached the lawyer's office, the clerk looked at me like I was another tired old man with a small complaint. But when I placed the folder on her desk and asked for Mr. Peterson, the senior partner, her expression changed. She saw the seriousness in my eyes, the kind that doesn't come from confusion, but from certainty. Mr. Peterson had helped me with property matters years ago. He was older now too, gray and patient, the kind of man who understood silence better than words. He led me into his office, and I sat down across from him. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask for an explanation. He just opened the folder. For the next 2 hours, we went through every document, every line, every signature. I had prepared for this moment with precision. The house, the accounts, the insurance, all still tethered to me. All still under my final control. We drafted the papers slowly. The new sale agreement, the ownership transfer, the closure of joint accounts. Each stroke of the pen felt like a quiet reclaiming of breath. He asked if I wanted to notify my son, but I shook my head. "No," I said, "let the papers speak." Because that's the thing about legality. It doesn't shout. It doesn't warn. It just happens. And when it does, there's no undoing it. As the hours passed, signatures piled up. Witnesses came and went. Stamps pressed into paper like final nails in a coffin. Every click of the pen was another step away from the man who had spat on me, another inch of distance between who I was and who I was becoming. When it was done, Mr. Peterson looked at me carefully. "You're sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "He'll learn," I said simply. "Not through pain, through loss." I left the office and went straight to the bank. The manager there had known me for years, ever since I'd opened my first account. He greeted me with surprise. I hadn't visited in a long time. When I showed him the updated legal documents and requested immediate action, his tone shifted. Professional, careful, respectful. We went through each account. I revoked my son's name from the joint one, froze his access, and redirected the funds into my private account. I closed the card he used for payments, the one linked to my deposits. I updated the mailing address, changed the security codes, replaced the passwords. Everything was now mine alone. He would wake up tomorrow to a world that no longer recognized him in it. It wasn't revenge that guided me. It was balance. He had turned my trust into humiliation, my care into weakness. But now the scales were even. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because I used the quiet tools that he underestimated. The law, after all, doesn't need emotion. It only needs clarity. By the time I stepped out of the bank, the sun was high. The world went on as if nothing had changed. Cars passed, children laughed, birds sang, but my world had shifted entirely. The power he thought he held was gone, replaced by a silence that belonged to me. I stood for a long moment outside the building, feeling the winter wind against my face. It wasn't cold anymore. It felt clean, honest. like air I hadn't breathed in years. Back home, the house looked the same, still standing, still his pride. But the papers in my coat told a different story. On paper, it was mine, entirely, legally, untouchably mine. He could mock me, disrespect me, even forget me, but he could never change the ink. That night, they laughed again in the living room, thinking they still ruled the space I'd built. I sat quietly in my room, listening, holding the documents like a secret weapon. They didn't know yet, but their world had already been sold. Their laughter was borrowed time. And as I turned off my lamp and closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, not in anger, but in peace. The house is mine, the silence is mine, and tomorrow, the truth will be theirs. Morning came the same way it always did, with sunlight slipping through the curtains and birds chirping outside the window. But that morning, something was different. The house felt still. Too still. No radio playing in the kitchen, no coffee brewing, no lazy hum of normal life. I had already been awake for hours, sitting in my chair with my coat folded on my lap, waiting. I wasn't waiting for a fight. I was waiting for the sound of realization. The moment the world he built on arrogance began to crumble. From my room, I heard the footsteps upstairs, heavy, confident, careless. The sound of a man who still believed he owned everything he walked on. I heard him moving toward the front door, keys jangling in his hand, ready for another day of work, ready to wear pride like armor. Then, a pause. A long one. Papers rustled. His voice echoed faintly, confused at first, then irritated. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. The tone changed quickly. Irritation turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned to fear. The first notice he found was from the bank. A formal letter. Polite, cold, and devastating. The joint account had been closed. The funds were moved. His access revoked. He called the bank immediately, voice rising as I sat quietly in my chair. I could hear the faint ringing, then his words. "There's a mistake. This is my account." But the law doesn't recognize shouting. The voice on the other end must have told him what I already knew. There was no mistake. His name had been removed. Everything was legally binding, irreversible. He stormed down the hallway, pulling open drawers, looking for the checkbooks that were no longer valid. His face appeared in my doorway, pale, panicked, full of questions he didn't dare ask out loud. I looked at him once, calm and unshaken, then turned my gaze back to the window. I didn't need to say a word. My silence was an answer sharper than any accusation. He left the house in a hurry, slamming the door behind him. The sound of his car engine starting broke the quiet morning air. He drove to the bank, thinking he could fix it, charm them, intimidate them. The same tricks he had used on me. But power doesn't bend paper. By the time he arrived, the transactions had already cleared, the transfers sealed, the signatures witnessed. His accounts were gone, his credit frozen, his access revoked. The banker, probably nervous but polite, would have told him, "Your father finalized everything yesterday, sir." While he was out fighting ghosts, another storm brewed behind him. The real estate agent I'd spoken to the day before had already begun the process of listing the house. The property no longer belonged to him. It belonged to me, and soon, to no one. I had signed the preliminary sale documents the previous evening. By the time he returned home, his keys wouldn't fit the locks anymore. I imagine his face when he arrived, confusion giving way to horror as he found movers on the porch, strangers carrying boxes through the door he once thought was his. He would shout, demand, threaten, all the things proud men do when their control slips through their fingers. But every man with a clipboard would show him the same papers, my name, my signature. When he finally looked for me, I was gone. I had left hours before, quietly, walking down the road with a single suitcase and the dignity he couldn't take from me. I didn't wait to see him break. I didn't need to. The sound of his car engine fading into panic behind me was enough. The world has a strange way of balancing itself when truth takes its course. By nightfall, the house was empty, the lights off, the driveway silent. My phone buzzed with calls I didn't answer, messages filled with disbelief, rage, pleading. I turned it off. There was nothing left to say. He had spat on me in front of his family, laughing like I was a relic of another time. Now he would learn what silence can do, how it moves like a tide, slow but unstoppable, taking everything back with it. I spent that night in a small motel on the edge of town. The room was plain but peaceful. The hum of the heater and the stillness of solitude wrapped around me like armor. I looked out the window at the empty street and realized I had no sadness left, just clarity. The same clarity that comes when you finally stop loving people who see you only as a tool. The next morning, I would be gone for good. New city, new name, new peace. The house he spat in was now just a transaction number in someone else's hands. And I, the man he mocked, was free. The aftershock didn't come all at once. It began slowly, like cracks forming in glass, quiet, invisible, but spreading fast. The world my son had built on ego and borrowed pride began to fold in on itself, piece by piece. He didn't just lose the house. He lost the illusion that he was untouchable. Every phone call, every knock at the door, every letter in the mailbox was another reminder that the man he had mocked, the old fool he spat on, had been the one holding his life together all along. On the second morning after I left, the movers finished clearing the house. By noon, the locks had been changed, the new owner's papers filed, and my son's laughter, the same cruel, mocking laugh that had once filled those walls, was nowhere to be heard. The neighbors stood outside, whispering. They'd seen it all. They'd seen him boast, belittle, parade his wealth like a crown. Now they saw him standing outside his own home, yelling at men who didn't even bother to answer. Some shook their heads, some smiled quietly. Because in small towns, karma doesn't need a stage. It performs on front lawns. That night, he slept in his car. The same car I helped him buy 10 years ago when he was too broke to qualify for a loan. I imagined him there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner in his mind. The spit, the laughter, my silence. Maybe for the first time, he understood that I hadn't been silent out of fear, but out of power. Power that came from knowledge, from patience, from having built something he never learned how to value. By the third day, his wife was gone. She packed her bags quietly, leaving a note on the seat beside him that said, "You've ruined everything." Maybe she blamed him. Maybe she realized she'd married a man who could destroy his own father and still expect the world to forgive him. But the world doesn't forgive arrogance. It just waits for its moment. I heard later, through whispers, through the grapevine, that he tried to find me. He went to the lawyer's office, the bank, even the police. They all told him the same thing. Your father acted within his rights. That's the beauty of paperwork. It doesn't care about emotions. It doesn't need to shout. It just ends things. Legally, quietly, forever. The calls kept coming for weeks after that. I never picked up. Sometimes I'd listen to the voicemails, though. I could hear the change in his voice, from anger to pleading, from pleading to desperation. "Dad, please. I made a mistake. Please, I need help." The same man who once spat in my face was now begging through static, voice breaking like a child. But I didn't hate him anymore. Hate takes energy, and I had spent enough of my life pouring energy into him. I simply turned the phone off and went back to my coffee. The community turned cold toward him. Respect doesn't survive humiliation, especially when the story spreads fast. And stories like his spread faster than truth. People who once admired him now crossed the street to avoid him. Employers didn't return his calls. Friends stopped answering texts. He became what he had called me, worthless. Only now, he was learning what that word actually felt like. Meanwhile, I settled into a small apartment by the sea. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd wake early, open the window, and breathe air that didn't carry the weight of anyone else's laughter. No one here knew who I was or what I'd done. To them, I was just another quiet old man who walked to the pier every morning and fed the birds. And that was enough. I didn't need them to know my story. I only needed to know it was finished. Sometimes in those early mornings, I'd wonder what he was doing, whether he'd learned, whether he'd changed. But those thoughts didn't hurt anymore. They passed like the tide, rising, fading, leaving peace in their place. The anger was gone, replaced by something deeper: clarity. I had given him everything, and he had turned it into cruelty. Now, I had taken everything back, not out of revenge, but to remind the world that even the quietest man can end a storm. When I looked at the horizon, I felt no guilt, only calm. My son was left to rebuild, to face himself, to live with the echo of what he'd done. And I, the man he thought was weak, was finally free. I left before dawn. The sky was a deep gray, quiet, almost weightless, the kind of morning where the world feels like it's holding its breath. I had packed the night before. One suitcase, a few clothes, my papers, and a single photograph folded in half. My son, at 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders, both of us smiling without knowing what life would one day become. I didn't pack memories. I packed freedom. I locked the door, placed the keys in an envelope, and left it on the table. No note, no message, just the sound of the latch clicking for the last time. The road was empty as I walked toward the bus stop. The streetlights hummed faintly, casting pale yellow pools of light on the pavement. Every step I took felt lighter than the one before. Behind me was the house where I had lived, laughed, and been humiliated, a place that had turned from home to battlefield. Ahead of me was something far simpler: peace. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. The kind of peace that costs everything but gives back silence. The bus arrived late, its brakes sighing as it stopped in front of me. The driver, a man about my son's age, greeted me with a nod. "Long trip?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "The longest one yet," I said. I took a seat by the window, the leather cracked and cold. As the bus pulled away, I watched the town shrink. The familiar streets, the old bakery, the gas station, the hill where my son once rode his bike. Everything I'd built was fading into the distance, swallowed by fog. And with every passing mile, I felt something inside me untie. By the time the sun rose, I was miles away. I switched buses twice, trains once, and by evening, I stood at an airport I had never been to before. People rushed past me, families hugging, businessmen tapping phones, children dragging stuffed animals. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go. I had nowhere, and for the first time, that felt right. I wasn't running. I was disappearing. There's a difference. Running means fear. Disappearing means choice. At the counter, the woman asked for my destination. I looked up at the departure board, dozens of cities blinking in bright letters, and picked one at random. Lisbon, I said. I had never been, never even dreamed of it. But the word felt like release. I paid in cash, slid my passport across the counter, and took the ticket. It felt strange, holding a future that no one else knew existed. On the plane, I sat by the window again. The engines roared, the ground fell away, and for the first time in decades I smiled. Not a smile of victory, but one of peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging the world to understand you. I thought of my son then, not with anger, but with distance. He would wake soon to find my number disconnected, my accounts unreachable, my trail cold. He would look for me, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of need, but he would never find me. I had erased myself from his map the way he had erased respect from mine. When the plane broke through the clouds, the sunlight hit the wing and filled the cabin with gold. It felt like a sign, not from heaven, but from the quiet truth I'd been too blind to see all my life. You can love people and still have to leave them. You can forgive, but you don't have to return. Hours later, when I stepped off the plane, the air smelled of salt and new beginnings. I found a small inn by the coast, paid for a month in advance, and unpacked nothing. My suitcase stayed closed in the corner, as if even it knew I didn't belong anywhere anymore. The next morning, I stood by the window and watched the sunrise over the ocean. The waves were slow, patient, the same kind of patience I'd once mistaken for weakness. I breathed deeply and whispered to myself, "This is mine now. I didn't vanish out of hatred. I vanished to reclaim silence, the one thing they could never steal or spit on. My son had taken my peace for years, but now, as the tide came in and the gulls called overhead, I realized something. Leaving wasn't running away. It was returning. To myself, to dignity, to quiet. The quiet life didn't happen overnight. It crept in, slow and soft, like morning light through thin curtains. The first few days in that seaside town felt strange, almost unreal. No phone calls, no voices shouting from the next room, no footsteps echoing through hallways I built. Just wind, sea, and the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to responsibilities or insults. I woke up to stillness. It was unfamiliar, almost frightening, but after a while I realized, peace is supposed to be quiet. I rented a small cottage near the shore. White walls, one window facing the ocean, a crooked wooden chair by the door. It wasn't luxury, but it was honest. Every morning, I'd brew coffee in a chipped mug, sit outside, and watch fishermen cast their nets as the world turned golden. I didn't think about the past much anymore. It was still there, like an old scar, visible but painless. Sometimes, when I saw fathers walking with their sons along the docks, I'd feel a small tug in my chest. But it wasn't regret. It was recognition, a reminder of the life I gave and the lesson I earned. I kept my money where it couldn't be traced. I didn't live lavishly. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in spending. It was in knowing that every dollar he once depended on was now mine alone. The power I once gave away too easily had returned quietly, not to make me rich, but to make me free. Some evenings, the locals would invite me to sit by the fire at the tavern. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. They called me the quiet man, and I liked that. I'd listen to their laughter, their talk of fishing, their simple troubles, and I'd smile. These were people who knew the value of work, who didn't measure a man by his clothes or his bank account. It reminded me of who I used to be before betrayal taught me silence. Weeks passed like that, calm, uneventful, peaceful. I learned to live small again, to take walks without purpose, to eat slow, to sleep deeply, to feel no one's expectations hanging over my head. It's strange how, after years of chaos, peace feels heavy at first, like you're waiting for the next insult, the next storm. But eventually, the stillness starts to feel natural. Healing doesn't shout, it whispers. One day, I went to the post office and mailed a letter. Not to him, but to my lawyer. It simply said, "Finalized. Do not disclose location." That was it. No forwarding address, no signature needed. I didn't owe anyone my presence anymore. The world I had left behind could spin however it pleased. Sometimes I wondered what had become of him. My son, the one who once looked at me with admiration, then with disgust. Word travels even to distant shores, and I heard pieces of his story through people who didn't know they were talking about him. The man who once bragged about owning everything now worked odd jobs to pay debts. The house was long gone. His wife had remarried. His pride had been replaced by silence. I didn't smile when I heard it. I didn't celebrate. I just nodded. The world had finally taught him what I no longer needed to say. In the quiet life I chose, I found something money or revenge could never buy. Self-respect. The kind that doesn't need witnesses or applause. The kind that lives in how you wake up, how you breathe, how you carry yourself after being broken. People think revenge is about destruction. It's not. It's about restoration, putting things back where they belong. Dignity with the man who earned it. Consequences with the man who invited them. At night, I'd sit by the window and watch the horizon darken into stars. The ocean would whisper against the rocks, constant and patient. I'd think about all the years I wasted trying to be loved by people who only respected what I could give them. But now, there was nothing left to give, and that was freedom. In that small seaside cottage, surrounded by strangers who treated me kindly, I finally understood something simple. Peace doesn't arrive when the world changes. It arrives when you stop waiting for it to. Now, When I wake up and hear the ocean through the open window, I don't think about what I lost. I think about what I kept. My dignity, my silence, my peace. People spend their lives chasing apologies that never come, trying to fix people who were never broken, just cruel. I stopped chasing the day I walked away. Some call it revenge. I call it release. My son will spend his life wondering why it happened, why the man he mocked disappeared without a trace. Maybe someday he'll understand that it wasn't the spit, the insult, or even the betrayal that ended us. It was the moment he forgot who built his foundation and who could quietly remove it. I didn't destroy him, I simply let him live without me. And for men like him, that's the harshest punishment of all. Sometimes I take that old folded photograph out of my wallet, the one of him as a child on my shoulders. I look at it for a few seconds, then put it away again. That version of him, the boy with laughter in his eyes, is gone. The man he became died the moment he lost his respect for the one who raised him. I buried that memory long ago, not out of anger, but out of mercy. I built a life, lost it, and built one again. This time quieter, smaller, and stronger. I don't need applause for what I did. I don't need anyone to agree that it was right. Because peace isn't something you're given. It's something you take back when no one thinks you can. I left behind the house, the wealth, the noise. But what I truly left behind was weakness. Now I live simply, breathe freely, and sleep deeply. I'm not waiting for forgiveness, and I'm not offering any. The world is calm when you stop expecting fairness. He spat on my face thinking it would break me. Instead, it woke me. I sold his house, took everything he built from my sacrifices, and never came back. Final thought. He mocked my worth and laughed at my silence, until silence took everything he loved.